Hey, I'm Scrimshire and I'm back. We're back in the studio to do a walkthrough. The studio's changed a bit. If you were here watching these previously, you'll notice it's a bit different. The whole thing's been torn apart, rebuilt all the furniture, put all these panels that are in for acoustic treatment, new little desk for controlling things. Yeah, anyway, we're not here to talk about studio. I thought it would be good to start diving into the new album and how it came to be. The first single was the song Unity Gain, so that's where we're going to start. This whole album came together in October 2022, the end of October, just rolling a little bit into the beginning of November as well. I had been writing a couple of other albums during the year and kind of hit walls in terms of getting those produced. And so whilst I was waiting for various things to come together on those, I don't know, I was getting a little frustrated. And one day I sent off an email to my friend Emanative, Nick Woodmansey, and said, shall we make an album together? And Nick said, yeah, absolutely, but I'm like got touring and stuff. I'm off to Thailand, but soon we can do it. I said, well, I know what I'll do. I'll start like some bits and pieces of ideas, and then we can exchange them, and we can take it from there. And basically, I didn't stop at just ideas. In about 2 weeks, I wrote pretty much this whole album. So the working title was Screm, SCR, for Scrimshire, EM for Emanative, but it became very quickly apparent to me that the real working title for this whole project was Scream. It was about funneling a lot of frustration, anger, sadness from what was going on with our government at the time. If anyone in the UK, or probably worldwide, I mean, it was nonsensical and was just things were just insane and so surreal, and I needed to vent out in some way. And so I created a set of sounds and ideas, which we'll go through in other projects because they're more apparent there. I created a kind of like drum aesthetic that I was after, and then I started writing music over the top of those sorts of sounds. The point was to work quickly and efficiently and basically do it myself. And I would record, I'd come down, I'd be using like my Ableton push controller, and I would be hammering away ideas in there and recording them, and then playing with bass ideas over on the grandmother. And I've got Dave Corr's Prophet 6 over at the back on top of my Fender Rhodes over here. And his ARP Odyssey as well over here, which all of which have got used just for that immediacy of not messing around too much inside the computer, just really working down quickly. Anyway, a few weeks later I was actually out having a coffee with Dave, and we bumped into some people. It went from being a 10 a.m. coffee to me getting home at 3 in the afternoon, and I just needed to, I knew I wasn't going to get much other work done that day, so I just needed to like just play and chuck an idea out and really just sort of like explore something. And when I approach writing these days, in the last couple of years, I've really moved more towards trying to capture an entire progression and set of ideas in one go. Now, this might not sound unusual. When you grow up learning to produce, and production is kind of your like primary skill, and the playing is periphery to that, it's very tempting to work in blocks, you know, to have a set of chords and then come up with a drum beat and then work on that, and then you go, oh, maybe that's a verse, or maybe that's a chorus or something, and then work on the next section. And you want to build up a sense of the whole piece of music before you start moving forward. And it's very easy to fall into that as a continuing kind of pattern of behaviour and writing. I've found that I write as I record, or I record as I write. So the process can be really fragmented. And as I've moved on through this journey of writing, and in the last few years, the last 3 albums, what I've tried to really focus on more is moving away from using production techniques to transition between moments in a song, focusing way more on being a writer and writing through the transitions and making the music flow correctly first, and then thinking about how the arrangement can complement the song that I've written. Like I say, it's it's old school kind of like behaviour, but when you grow up writing on computers as your primary thing, that's not always the way you come at it. What I did was I did eventually play one whole take, and there's even like this outro section over here. Now this in the end never made it on, and then subsequently I went through and cut up the best played sections, because we've discussed this before, but I'm not, you know, a player as like my main thing. That is not it. So the playing's, even cutting out the best sections, the playing's pretty loose in this. Well, loose is a nice way of putting it. There's a lot of mess in here. And then my next step was basically bringing up addictive drums, which I've used massively on this whole album. There are no live drum recordings on the album Paroxysm. When you hear it, it's all programmed or finger played by me on the Ableton Push. And it turned out, you know, that I'd written this as a 7/4. So getting a nice rhythm in place was good, and I would use that all the way through, and then I separately recorded the ride cymbals to get rhythm and dynamics into that. You can see afterwards that I've cut and played a lot with elements of this. Sometimes I've cut and pasted sections just to keep consistency, to keep groove, because, you know, I find it hard to maybe keep consistency of power when I'm playing, especially drum rolls and stuff like that in this kind of situation. So it really helps to just go through, and I had to do a lot of like individual tweaking of bits and pieces of individual. You see down here like each individual velocity of the beats. Sometimes they needed a little playing with to make sure that they rose and fall the way I wanted them to, especially in some of these latter sections where it gets really a lot more intense. And, you know, like, my playing's not bang on, but because of the intricacy, I didn't want to use the quantize button to snap everything to a grid. I wanted to keep the human feel, that kind of flow to it. So I went through and individually, in some cases, I did have to move little things onto the beat and just tidy little moments up in a really... But you can hear, like, there's imperfections, and that's fine. I'm not really a perfectionist. Although I say that I'm going through individual beats and then adjusting them for volume and timing. I'm not seeking perfection, I'm just really trying to ensure that the groove works. The next step was the bass line, and I distinctly remember that I was supposed to be, it was because I made this on a Friday. On the Saturday evening, we were going out somewhere. You know, I had about an hour to kill after I kind of got myself ready, and I came in here to just listen to music whilst we were pottering around, and I put the track on, and I was just like, oh, you know, I'll have a little play. So I sat on the grandmother and played the bass line for this track, and it was really flowing for me. everything was just really working. So that evening, in fact, I recorded this whole bass line in that hour that I had spare. And I took it, not just the audio, but the MIDI, because initially I recorded it and I was also playing with the cutoff for the track, for the bass line, to give loads of movement into it. In some ways, at first I was thinking about whether this would just be piano, bass and drums. And so I was playing right hand over here on the bass and then doing movements on the cutoff. The cutoff filter works a little bit like an EQ. On the Moog, it's this huge knob here because it gets a lot of use. So every synthesizer manufacturer kind of does these a little bit differently. In essence, it's like using an EQ. The synthesizer sound that we've got at the moment, this bass sound here, has like a full range of sizzling kind of top sounds and then low sub bass kind of sounds. This is a cutoff filter, so it allows us to basically sweep down and take away some of those frequencies. So it's kind of equivalent to doing this, taking a high cut filter on an EQ and sweeping it down. So I was playing that with the left hand to get movement in the dynamic sections, and playing the bass line itself with the right hand. Again, then what I realised was that was going to be really loose playing, and it was okay, but you know, there was room for improvement. So then send the signals that I'd originally recorded back out to the grandmother, deleting the original audio and recording it back in, but filtered off, so it is just, in the bass line, it's just the low stuff. But then what I did was record a second version using exactly the same signals, sending exactly the same data out to the grandmother. I'm recording it back in, but this time with the bass all filtered out and just leaving space to do the loud tops and the brightness and that kind of movement and energy. Because you know, they're really played with moments like that. You know, getting those sweeps to work exactly right for the crescendos, exactly where I wanted them, was really important to make this move. Because like I say, initially I was just thinking, do you know what? This will do. This will be the track. But no, because I can't help adding stuff to music, and either I'm not brave enough to do that, or I don't think it's that. You know, I just hear a lot going on in my head, a lot of opportunities, and when I get to a point like this, my mind is always saying, is this what it needs to be? Does this reach the heights that it can reach as it is now? And making the decision as to whether it needs more is hard. If I add more, will it take away or will it bring more to this? That often reaches the point of, do I need to think about a singer on this? What would a vocalist bring to this song? In this particular track, I think it was relatively clear to me that the vocal wasn't really going to bring what the track needed to it, so that wasn't much of a consideration. But there's always that thing in the back of my mind, when you've got a beautiful instrumental, if the perfect vocal could turn it into something just magnificent. And so all these options are just always there in your mind. Could we take it there? If we take it there, will it be better? Do we run the risk of harming the song as a result? But laying down a few synths and seeing if it works or if it doesn't work isn't a big deal. So I ploughed on, and one of the first things I did was to try emphasising certain key chord moments, particularly in the chorus, for which we used the Prophet. A really thin sound, you know, and nice and wobbly as well, using some tape style on this. But it was really clear that, you know, the track's really full. That bass is doing a lot of work. There's a lot going on in there. So anything else that was going to come really needed to just kind of complement in its own space. If you fill it up too much, if I brought in too much of the lower part of that stab sound, as good a sound as it was, and it took a little while to get it right, it would just be clashing and you lose energy. The more sound you put in, the less kind of volume you get. And this needed to be big and powerful and energetic. For a little bit more epic space, the classic, this is an emulation. You know, I haven't got a Mellotron, but I love the Mellotron sound ever since listening to Genesis records when I was like 13, 14 years old. So if you're not familiar with the Mellotron, it's kind of like it's not a synthesizer as such, but basically it runs off cassettes, and as you play the notes, each note triggers a cassette loop that plays out sound. And the Mellotron had some great standard things like flutes, which you'd know from Strawberry Fields Forever by the Beatles, violins, cellos, choirs. So you get these, and because of the old tape sound, it's got such a distinctive sound that you, hearing this now, you're probably familiar with, having heard it somewhere else before if you're not already a massive fan. Final couple of elements were to play in some Rhodes. I just wanted to pull out some sections, some little elements. There's these elements in the track where, you know, I guess you'd call them verses. And without a vocal, and as I'm not a soloist and I didn't really intend to solo on this track in any way, you know, it still needed little moments of movement, things that would keep that interesting as we go through these things which are necessary, these lulls that are necessary in order to then build up and take the next steps into the big climax. We've got a little bit of EQ, old school Neve style, always inspired by the incredible Jessica Lauren, her the Mutron biphase pedal, which you know, she introduced me on the very first time that we made a song together. I think when we did You Will Save Me, she got the Mutron out into some compression to really keep it super tight and punchy, tucked. This is really tucked into the mix. It's not supposed to pop out too much except for sections where you look, I grabbed that and I turned that up. For some extra special wobbliness. And look, I'm slamming it through this tape machine here. And then adding some wow and flutter, the old tape wobble. And then finally cutting it down massively in the mix. So we're just really using the absolute essentials that are going to punch through. The very last elements, ARP, Odyssey, sounds. It's just, this for me is just like, I use this on so much of my music. This kind of flute inspired sound on the ARP. Very much inspired, initially at least, by some of Stevie's recordings with Tonto. And when I created this melody, it just really occurred to me that as I heard it in the track, it was giving me a sense of horns, orchestra. So I just thought, you know what, we will add a little bit of the Spitfire Audio symphony orchestra patches that they've got on here, and I used the tenor trombones, but just to give it that grandiose feel. And that's actually it. That's all of it. Not tons going on in this particular one. It's all about arrangement. It's all about just lifting particular moments. So I brought this across very much as drums, bass, keys and synthesizers. And because I'd done so much work in the first place, the hardest thing was really getting the drum sound that I was very specifically after here, which is all done through this more tape, and my favourite compressors, more EQ, a little bit of clipping just literally clips the tops off, the biggest peaks in the track. Touch of EQ to control the bass and the low end of the kick drum, and then a final bit of EQ just to get it all nice and tight. Everything else, I hardly touch at this point. It's just about balancing job at this point in the mix. Got a little bit of parallel drum processing. Absolutely distorted and slammed drums. Just to bring a little bit of the lower energy that you can't hear in the drums out. So yeah, that's Unity Gain. I hope that is interesting, and it's fun to go back through the projects and see how they came to be and share them with you. I hope you've enjoyed this track in the first place when you heard it, and I hope that maybe gives you a little more feeling of how it came together. I'll do some more in the coming weeks. Next one up, I'll do Unforgiven featuring Nat Virtual. Yeah, we'll keep going and build up to the release of the Paroxysm album, which is available to pre-order vinyl, digital right now. Thanks very much for listening and watching. If you've got any specific things you want to know about tracks or about production, about mixing, just drop me a message or comment on the video, and I can try and address it a little bit more in future editions, episodes, you call them that. And yeah, cheers.